yesterday. Yesterday, an FBI director was arraigned for making a false statement. The day before that, the Attorney General of the United States made arguably even falser statements. We'll see how the other case turns out. And she left the current FBI director completely exposed on his multiple false statements that his grand jury testimony in the Mar-a-Lago case had been sealed by the department, was under court order not to be released, and had since been publicly released as a transcript. I don't know if this committee is going to take itself seriously enough to treat false statements to this committee as serious matters, irrespective of who made them.
When Senator Whitehouse took the mic, he didn't just defend himself. He dismantled the Justice Department's credibility. What he revealed about Pam Bondi's false claims and the FBI's contradictions should shake anyone who still believes in accountability. This wasn't politics as usual. This was a masterclass in truth versus power.
I'd like to make 2 points. The first has to do with Arctic frost and the information, Chairman, that you released the other day. It's been described as a politically weaponized investigation, but I ask my colleagues, should there have been no investigation of the raiding and the ransacking of the United States Capitol? Of course there should have been an investigation. And by the way, I was with many of you during those dark hours, and there was no doubt in anybody's mind in the Senate at that point that crimes had been committed and that they needed to be investigated. So please, let's not pretend that the fact that the FBI investigated the raiding and the ransacking of the United States Capitol is itself in any way politically weaponized. That is their job. To the question of senators being in the list of toll record investigations, I'm eager to get to the bottom of that. I think we should get to the bottom of that. But let's remember what this was. This was toll records, which for those of us who've been prosecuting for a while is similar to a pen register, which is where in the old days the phone company would clip a register onto the wire, and you wouldn't know what was said. You would only know what number called what other number and for how long. When you have what prosecutors would call predication, to put a pen register on one number, you necessarily pick up everybody else who was called. That doesn't make them the subjects of any investigation. Similarly, if you're running a wiretap, and by the way, a pen register is not a wiretap, and senators on this committee should be knowledgeable and scrupulous enough not to confuse the two. But were this a wiretap, the same thing would take place. If, as U.S. Attorney, I got a wiretap on a Rhode Island mobster, and that mobster called the butcher, the baker, or the babysitter, the butcher, the baker, or the babysitter are now swept into the investigation by virtue of having been called. It doesn't make them the subject of any investigation. And with wiretaps, it works that you have minimization procedures, so you shut it off and so forth. So, but this wasn't a wiretap. This was toll records, the modern equivalent of a pen register that only shows who was called. So before we start to reach irate conclusions about weaponized FBIs going after people, it is worth taking a calming step back to consider the possibility that the FBI had proper predication for certain phones, and that those phones then called the senators. I don't know what happened, and I support the chairman's desire to investigate this. But we should investigate this without reaching dire conclusions before we have the evidence. Because there is a very clear investigative scenario in which the FBI has proper predication to get toll records, or in the old days, a pen register on a investigative target's phone, and then necessarily everyone the target called comes into the toll record, comes into the pen register. That's just how it works. That's what investigations are supposed to do. And if there's proper predication, you then go to the second step, to see if there's a basis for investigation of the person at the other end of the call. So let's just understand that we shouldn't be drawing a lot of irate conclusions before we know what the facts are in the context of how such investigations actually work. Here's the second thing, and this goes back to the ranking member's comments about yesterday. To me, yesterday was an awful day in the history of this committee. It set new low after new low after new low. And I'm not going to talk about all of the new lows. I'm going to talk about one in particular. And that is whether anybody noticed the irony that the day before the United States Department of Justice arraigned a former FBI director for allegedly making untruthful statements to this committee, the Attorney General of the United States sat right there and made untruthful statements to this committee. And they weren't maybe untruthful statements. This wasn't a question of nuance. She made allegations about the ranking member and me having received political contributions from some, she said, Epstein close confidant. Well, guess what? That's actually checkable. There's a thing called the Federal Election Commission. The Federal Election Commission keeps a website that tracks all of our contributions. An intern at the Department of Justice could have checked to see that the allegation, I'll leave it to myself, that I had received campaign contributions from this individual, that was false. And it's not a maybe answer, it's a yes or no. Did I or didn't I? And there's an unimpeachable record that shows that what she said sitting right there was not true. If we are going to care about untruthful statements made by the Department of Justice and the FBI in this committee, let's not have this be yet another area where there are different rules for one party than for the other party. And just by the way, on that very subject, the other thing that the Attorney General did sitting right there was to strip all cover away from the untruthful statements that had been made to this committee by the current FBI director. You all heard him here. He said that he couldn't tell us about his grand jury testimony in the Mar-a-Lago case, where he first pled the fifth, then got immunity, and then testified. He couldn't tell us what he testified to, he said, because the Department of Justice had sealed the testimony, and because there was a court order barring him from doing that. And he actually identified which judge, the chief judge of the DC Federal District Court. Well, guess what? We know that since then, the chief judge of the Federal District Court has said that that was not true. He said specifically nothing prevented Director Patel from discussing his grand jury testimony. And yesterday, the Attorney General had the chance to say, you're right. We did seal the testimony in that matter. The Department of Justice did seal the testimony, and Patel's statement was true. Not about the court order, but at least it was sealed by the Department of Justice. She didn't say that. So now both his testimony that the DOJ had sealed his testimony and his testimony there was a court order barring his testimony are kind of demonstrably false statements to this committee. And then when he came back and we challenged him on those false statements, his second false statement was to say, I'm not going to answer any of those questions because my transcript of the grand jury testimony, I've worked with the DOJ to see that it is publicly released. Well, it either has been publicly released or it hasn't. It's a very simple distinction, yes or no. And we all know that it has not, in fact, been publicly released. And when we asked about that from the Attorney General, again, she left him high and dry and refused to say that anything had been publicly released, that there was any publicly released transcript. So yesterday stands in really stark contrast, I should say the day before yesterday stands in really stark contrast to yesterday. Yesterday, an FBI director was arraigned for making a false statement. The day before that, the Attorney General of the United States made arguably even falser statements. We'll see how the other case turns out. And she left the current FBI director completely exposed on his multiple false statements that his grand jury testimony in the Mar-a-Lago case had been sealed by the department, was under court order not to be released and had since been publicly released as a transcript. I don't know if this committee is going to take itself seriously enough to treat false statements to this committee as serious matters, irrespective of who made them. But the contrast is really stark. Thank you, Chairman.
When Senator Sheldon Whitehouse speaks, there's a certain calm authority that cuts through all the political noise, and that's exactly what he did here. This moment isn't just about the back and forth between Democrats and Republicans. It's about something much deeper: the integrity of law enforcement and how political narratives can distort legitimate investigations. Senator Grassley's Arctic Frost report painted a dramatic picture that the FBI was somehow targeting Republicans' phones in a politically motivated fishing expedition. But Whitehouse steps in to do what so few people in Washington are willing to do these days: explain how investigations actually work. He reminds everyone of a basic but crucial fact. When the FBI investigates a serious crime, especially something as grave as the January 6th attack, the goal isn't politics, it's justice. If someone's phone number shows up in an investigation, it doesn't mean they are the target. It simply means their number was connected to someone who was. That's how law enforcement connects dots, not how it plays politics. And Whitehouse brings a prosecutor's clarity to this, explaining concepts like pen registers and toll records, which track who called whom, but not what was said. He's educating the committee, and really the country, about the difference between surveillance, investigation, and political paranoia. This is what being a responsible lawmaker looks like: grounding heated accusations in facts and process. Because while political theater gets the headlines, understanding how justice is supposed to function is what actually matters to democracy. But then Whitehouse pivots, and this is where his statement hits another level. He calls out the double standard that's taken root in Washington. He points out the irony that while Republicans were quick to call the FBI weaponized, the very same Justice Department officials who made false statements to the Senate seem to escape the same level of outrage. His point isn't partisan, it's principled. If we're going to demand truth and accountability from the FBI, that standard must apply to everyone, including those in power. That's the heart of what makes Sheldon Whitehouse stand out. He's not afraid to confront misinformation from the other side, but he also insists that truth must be consistent no matter who it implicates. In an era where selective outrage is the norm, that's rare. And if you think about it, his calm, logical tone here is powerful precisely because it contrasts with the chaos around him. While others shout about conspiracies, he's teaching the public how institutions actually function. That's how you protect democracy, not by spinning narratives, but by grounding people in facts. Moments like this are a reminder that in politics today, we desperately need more educators and fewer agitators. People who are willing to walk the public through how things work, not just how they want things to look. Because when the truth gets drowned out by outrage, that's when democracy becomes vulnerable. And in this clip, Whitehouse wasn't just defending the FBI. He was defending the very idea that facts still matter, even in Washington. And maybe that's what's so powerful here. Not just what he said, but how he said it. Calm, reasoned, factual. That's leadership. That's integrity. If you value truth over theatrics, if you believe that democracy depends on understanding, not manipulation, then voices like Senator Whitehouse's deserve to be amplified. And that's exactly why we do what we do here on Liberal Lens, to unpack the noise, reveal the truth, and remind everyone that accountability shouldn't have a party. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if you believe in keeping political discourse informed, not inflamed. Let's keep truth trending.